Okay, good morning. So we finished Dante today, and this will be our last session before the semester breaks. We'll come back in a month, and we'll start the second semester. Second semester will be very exciting. We're going to do the Crusades. We're going to do secret societies. We'll do basically the rest of human history. Okay, so before we begin, let's review what we learned last class. Okay. The first point is that there are secrets, mysteries, and paradoxes embedded into Dante's Divine Comedy. And the ultimate secret of the universe is that we are in God and God is in us. And that's the ultimate secret. And it breaks apart the idea of the Holy Trinity. Remember, the idea of the Holy Trinity is that it's an equation that makes God exclusive from us. And at the end of the Divine Comedy, Dante inserts us back into God, which turns the equation back into a story that we are empowered to write. Okay? And it creates the idea of infinity. The idea behind this, and this goes back to Homer, is for Dante, love is the unifying force of the universe. Remember that God is the force within us that enables us to love and connect with others. And then the imagination is the animating force of the universe. The more we love, the more we can imagine. And it is our responsibility, it is our legacy, it is our gift that we are able to imagine the universe and continue the work of God. And the prime example of this is, of course, Dante. What inspires Dante to create the universe that is the Divine Comedy is his love for Beatrice. It is unrequited. They never got married. They never consummated their love. In fact, Beatrice died when she was very young. But Dante never forgot about her. And it was this love for it was this love for Beatrice that would inspire him to create the Divine Comedy, which is the greatest literary achievement in human history. And as we discussed, the second point is that the Divine Comedy, it is historically significant because it becomes an intellectual blueprint for the Renaissance, for the Protestant Reformation, and the Silent Revolution. And then you ask yourself, wait a minute here. When I read the Divine Comedy, I don't really understand what's going on. So how did it come to be so historically significant? And the answer is this. The answer is that it is poetry. And poetry is a unique form of writing. Poetry is meant to be memorized, okay? So the way you learn, that you're educated for thousands of years in Western history is through the memorization of classical poets. So remember the Greeks, how did they educate themselves? They memorized Homer. The Romans memorized Vergil. And the Italians memorized Dante. And poetry is uniquely designed in order to be memorized. And so that's the first step. And then the second step is this. Think of poetry as a superfood for the brain. You are what you eat. And your brain thinks the way that it has consumed information. And so poetry is this extremely dense, nutritious food that the brain will use in order to formulate its understanding of the world. Okay? And what's really interesting is the brain actually works 99% subconsciously, meaning we are not consciously aware of what the brain is doing most of the time. And what the brain is doing most of the time is trying to figure out the patterns of the universe. The brain does not like paradoxes. It does not like mysteries. It does not like contradictions. Okay? So it's always trying to resolve these contradictions in order to formulate a coherent understanding of the world. That's why paradox is so powerful within the Divine Comedy. As we discussed last class, the Divine Comedy is full of paradoxes, which forces your brain to constantly work to resolve these paradoxes. The greatest paradox within the Divine Comedy, as we discussed last class, is the fact that we are within God. And that creates a paradox for the brain to slowly resolve. And once it resolves, it formulates a new understanding of the world. And because of that, this new understanding will become the Renaissance brain, the scientific brain, which will power the rise of modernity. Okay? Does that make sense? So the third point, the most important point, is what Dante realized when he wrote the Divine Comedy is that if he is to create a new modern brain, if he is to create a new scientific romantic mind, then his true enemy is actually not Augustine. Okay? It is actually Virgil. Because at this time, every educated individual was educated through Virgil. It was Virgil's understanding of the world that captured the imagination of the European mind. And so Dante, when he writes the Divine Comedy, his mission is to supplant Virgil. It is to remove Virgil from the brain, the mind of the European. He basically needs to poetically do surgery. Okay? And so what I'll do is this. First, I'll explain the thesis and explain what he's trying to do, and then we'll study the Divine Comedy to see how he does that. Okay? So Dante understands that if Virgil has become the basis of your mind, okay, if the Aeneid is the way that people fundamentally understand the world, you cannot go into an open conflict with Virgil because people will just reject you, right? People will choose their customs, their habits first. And so if you threaten their habits and customs, then they will see you as a threat. They will reject you. So Dante has to perform surgery on the brain that is nuanced and subtle and sophisticated. Okay? And the way he does that, it's very clever. Dante makes his arch nemesis, Virgil, the hero of the Divine Comedy. Okay? Virgil is the guide, the narrator, the protagonist of the Divine Comedy. What happens is that we start off with Dante, the poet, lost in the woods. And it's a symbol or metaphor for his midlife crisis. He doesn't know where he's going. He's confused by the world. And suddenly, Virgil appears before him and says, I am Virgil the poet, and I've been sent by the Lady Beatrice from heaven to guide you through Inferno and through Purgatory, where you will learn the secrets of the universe, where you will learn the truth about the world, and I am your guide. I will tell you the truth. Okay? So right from the start, we learn that Virgil is the hero, the guide. That's the first thing that happens. And the second thing that happens is Dante turns him into an unreliable guide. We will discover that Virgil does not speak the truth. In fact, Virgil contradicts himself all the time. And the third thing that will happen is Virgil, over time, will become displaced by other figures, including Beatrice. All right? So it is one of the greatest literary tricks where Dante understands Virgil his ultimate nemesis. And in order to defeat Virgil, he makes Virgil the hero of this epic. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So it's the idea of the unreliable narrator. All right. So we're going to study some passages from the Divine Comedy to see how Dante does this. And it's very clever. It's almost impossible to spot unless you recognize what Dante is trying to do. Okay? Once I tell you what he's doing, it's then as obvious. But again, if you were to read the Divine Comedy by yourself, you wouldn't notice it. Okay? But again, the brain works subconsciously. And the brain will slowly, over time, pick up these problems with Vergil and construct a new worldview that is anti-Vergil and pro-Dante. Okay? That's a trick of the Divine Comedy. Any questions before I continue? Are we clear? All right. So Vergil and Dante are now going to explore in the Inferno, hell. And they first end up in limbo. Okay? And limbo is the outer circle of hell. And it's a very nice place. It's not paradise. It's not great. It's still part of hell. But it's a place specifically for virtuous pagans who were born before the time of Jesus. You can only be saved by Jesus if you were baptized into the faith. And so if, unfortunately, you were born before the time of Jesus, you are put in limbo. And that's where Vergil is, okay? So Vergil explains to Dante, the kindly master, okay? So there are all these encomiums for Vergil. Vergil is the father to Dante. Vergil is the master to Dante, all right? Do you not ask who are the spirits whom you see before you? I'd have you know, before you go ahead, did not sin, okay? These people are virtuous, including himself. These are people who include Plato, Homer, Julius Caesar, okay? These individuals are virtuous. Though they have merits, that's not enough because they lack baptism, okay? The fundamental rule of heaven is you have to be baptized into the faith, the portal of the faith that you embrace. And if they lived before Christianity, they did not worship God in fitting ways. And of such spirits, I myself am one. Okay? This is why I'm here in limbo. I am as virtuous as can be. But because I was not baptized in the faith, I am stuck here. Okay? Of course, this raises a question because Dante has nothing but questions. And Dante asks him this question. Is this an iron law of the universe? Or were there exceptions? Okay, so he asks, did any ever go by his own merit or others from this place towards blessedness? Were they able to ascend into heaven based on his or her own individual struggle and merit? And this is what Vergil says. There was only one time in the entire history of the universe when it was possible for people in limbo to ascend into heaven. And that was the death of Jesus Christ. Remember that he was crucified, then he died before he was resurrected. And then when he died, he ascended into the Inferno. And while he was there, he took the most virtuous members of the Bible, okay, who include Abel, Adam, Noah, Moses, Abraham, David, Israel. He took all of them into heaven. But that was it, okay? And that was a rare event, right? Because Jesus, God, only dies once. But that's it, all right? And so that's what Vergil is saying. Okay, so now that they've been through limbo, what they're going to do is they're going into the inner circles of hell. And the first circle of hell are reserved for those who died, who sinned because of love, because of lust. Okay? And what's going to happen is that there's going to be a parade of all these souls, these spirits, who are burning in hell because they died for love or lust. They sinned out of love. All right? So the first of those about whose history you want to know, my master told me, once ruled as empress over many nations. her vice of lust became so customary that she made license licit in her laws to free her from the scandal she had caused. She is Semiramis, of whom we read that she was Nina's wife and his successor. Okay, that's the first person they see. She held the land the Sultan now commands. All right? But now, there's a second person. The other spirit killed herself for love, and she betrayed the ashes of Psychias. The wanton Cleopatra follows next. All right? So this is interesting. What's going to happen is there'll be about 1,000 spirits who are parading before Dante and Vergil. And what's interesting is that Vergil names every one of them except this person. The other spirit killed herself for love, and she betrayed the ashes of Psychias. This person, her name is Dido. Who is Dido? Dido is from the Aeneid, right? She is the later creation of Vergil. This is really interesting because why is Dido in the Inferno? Because Vergil put her there. And not only does he put her there, he does not even bother to acknowledge and name her. This is a complete contrast to the relationship between Dante and Beatrice. Now, when you actually read the Aeneid, what you discover is that there's only one realistic character in the epic, and it's Dido. The way that she behaves, her love for Aeneas. It actually makes her a sympathetic character. But it's her love for Aeneas that causes her to die. Okay? And so, who is Dido? Who is Dido really? Well, if she's a later creation of Vergil's, I can guess, we can surmise that Dido must have existed. And Dido is someone who possibly could have spited Vergil, right? And that's why Vergil has such venom for her, right? Remember, in the Aeneid, Dido dies by flinging herself into a funeral pyre, okay? She burns herself to death. It's a terrible way to die. And she dies driven into madness by love. So you can almost make the argument that you can surmise Vergil really hates this person. And he wanted to punish her for refusing him in real life. And this is interesting for us because this is diametrically opposed to what Dante did, right? Dante loved Beatrice, but he could not possess Beatrice. So what he does is he creates the Divine Comedy so that Beatrice can be in paradise for all of eternity. Okay? This is diametrically opposed. So right away, from this, we can understand that Dante and Vergil have opposing perspectives on love. These are not friends. These are enemies. All right? Now, let's continue. Vergil refuses to name Dido, okay? But what Dante will do is name Dido, okay? Those spirits left the ranks where Dido suffers. Vergil, you refuse to acknowledge your creation, but I will, because she deserves our mercy. She deserves our charity and our generosity. So you can see how within the poetry, there's this massive conflict going on between Vergil and Dante. And it's all very subtle. Okay? Okay. Now, they go through Inferno and they end up in Purgatory. Purgatory is this isolated mountain that is the halfway point between Inferno and Paradise. People have to ascend the Purgatory in order to get into Paradise. Okay? And these are the first lines of Purgatory. I saw a solitary patriarch near me, his aspect worthy of such reverence that even son to father owes no more. Okay, this person is Cato. Cato is a Roman patriarch who opposed Julius Caesar, and when Julius Caesar was about to win the Civil War, Cato killed himself. He committed suicide rather than submit to Julius Caesar. Now, what's interesting about this is that Cato and Virgil are contemporaries. They knew each other in Rome. And when they died, they went to limbo, right? What's interesting is this. Where's Cato now? Cato is in purgatory. He's left limbo. He's left the inferno. And not only that, but he's become the guardian of purgatory. He's the one who controls access into purgatory. So Virgil is wrong. Remember, Virgil said it's impossible to leave limbo regardless of your merit. And this right away tells us, no, Virgil is not a reliable narrator. Cato has left. Okay? Now, you would imagine that because Cato and Virgil know each other, they're like good friends, okay? So Cato says to Virgil and Dante, like, who are you two? How are you able to escape from hell? Okay? And then Virgil says, let me do the talking because I know this guy, okay? We're friends, right? I did not come through my own self. There's a lady sent from heaven, okay? This lady is Beatrice. Her pleas led me to help and guide this man. But since your will would have a far more full and accurate account of our condition, my will cannot withhold what you request. You want to know why we're here? Let me explain to you why we're here. This man had yet to see his final evening. He's not dead, but through his folly, little time was left before he did. He was so close to it. He was facing a midlife crisis. As I've told you, I was sent to him for his deliverance. The only road I could have taken was the road I took. I had to take him through hell. Okay, and that's why we're here. I showed him all the people of perdition. Now I intend to show to him those spirits who, in your care, okay, remember, Cato is the guardian of purgatory, are bound on expiation. Okay, so people are here in purgatory in order to absolve themselves of their sins so that they may ascend into heaven. Now, this is what Virgil says to Cato. You know it, who in Utica found death, for freedom was not bitter, when you left the garb that will be bright on the great day. So I know who you are. You're Cato. You're the person who killed himself in Utica rather than submit to the tyranny of Julius Caesar. Eternal edicts are not broken for us. This man's alive, and I'm not bound by Minos, but I am from the circle where the chaste eyes of your Marcia, your wife, are. I know your wife. And she still prays to you, O holy breast, to keep her as your own. For her love then inclined to us. Remember Marcia, your wife. Allow our journey through your 7 realms. I shall thank her for kindness you bestow, if you would let your name be named below. So what Virgil is doing is saying to Cato, listen, you may be the guardian of purgatory. This is your master of this realm, but I have power in hell. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to be nice to your wife, Marcia. Right? So give me some face here, man, you know? And this is what Cato says. While I was there, within the other world, Marcia so pleased my eyes. He then replied, each kindness required I satisfied. Now that she dwells beyond the evil river, she has no power to move me any longer. Such was the law decreed when I was freed. So Cato is upset with this. Cato says to Virgil, how dare you bribe me? How dare you do this? Marcia is back in limbo, which means she is no longer as pure in my eyes as I used to think. If I'm able to ascend into purgatory based on my own merit, then so was Marcia. And if she's not able to come with me, that means she's not as virtuous as I once thought. Okay? So you can see right away that Vergil is not reliable. He has no authority over Cato. Cato does not respect him, even though they know each other very well. Okay? Does that make sense? Again, this is very, very clever. It's almost impossible to see unless I tell you what's happening. Okay? All right. Now the question then is, what makes Vergil so unreliable? What is his problem? And what Dante will reveal to us is, it's really Vergil's conception of love that's the issue. Okay? Remember, Vergil is someone who condemned Dido into hell. And it is Dante who sent Beatrice into heaven. Okay? So these two individuals have radically opposing conceptions of love. So we know what Dante thinks about love, okay? Love is the God force within us that connects us with God and the entire universe. And the more that we love, the more imaginative we will be, okay? So you have to direct this love at someone, but it doesn't really matter if that person loves you back. That's not relevant, okay? What's relevant is that you love. So let's look at Vergil's understanding of love. The soul which is quick to love responds to everything that pleases just as soon as beauty wakens it to act. Okay, so the first thing we have to understand is that we are animals with souls that respond to beauty. If I see a beautiful woman across the street, I stop and I chase her. Okay? That's the first thing he says. Your apprehension draws an image from a real object and expands upon that object until soul has turned toward it. But then you're like, but you don't know this beautiful woman. And what Vergil says is, what happens next is your imagination will take over and you will turn this woman into a fantasy woman that you can now control. Okay? So let's go back to the example from last class where you meet this beautiful woman and you say, I want to marry you because you're so beautiful. And she says, I will if you give me $10 million. Now, if you think about it, she's clearly saying no to you. But it is your imagination that tricks you into believing that as long as you give her $10 million, she will love you. Okay? Her love is something that you can master and control and possess. And if so turn the soul tend steadfastly, then that propensity is love, its nature that joins the soul in you anew through beauty. Okay? You must possess her. You will do everything possible in order to possess her. And that's what love is. All right? You see someone beautiful, you turn her into a fantasy, and then you chase after this fantasy until it's yours. That's what love is. Then, just as flames ascend because the form of fire was fashioned to fly upward toward the stuff to its own sphere where it lasts longer. Okay, so you can understand that what Vergil uses is a lot of natural imagery, okay? Fire. So these are things beyond our control, right? We are consumed by our lust and our love for this woman. So does the soul, when seized, move into longing, a motion of the spirit, never resting till the beloved thing has made it joyous. We have to possess it. If we don't possess it, then we will be depressed. Now you can plainly see how deeply hidden truth is from scrutinists who would insist that every love is in itself praiseworthy. Okay? There's some people who believe that love is beautiful. No. It depends on who you love. Okay? And they are led to error by the matter of love because it may seem always good, but not each seal is fine, although the wax is. Okay? If you love a woman who loves you back, that's fine. But if a woman insists that you go rob a bank for $10 million, then that's bad. All right? Your speech and my own wit that follow it, I answered him, this is Dante, have shown me what love is, but that has filled me with greater doubt. For if love's offered to us from without, and it's the only foot with which soul walks, soul going straight or crooked has no merit. Okay? This is a really interesting question. if it is true that when we see someone beautiful, we must have her, then we have no free will. We have no free choice. We're just all animals. And this is what Vergil says. What reason can see here, I can impart. Past that, for truth of faith, its Beatrice alone you must await. Every substantial form, at once distinct from matter and conjoined to it, ingathers the force that is distinctly its own. A force unknown to us until it acts. It's never shown except in its effects, just as green boughs display the life in plants. So it is true that our soul wants to possess things that are beautiful, okay? That's what love is. And thus man does not know the source of his intelligence or of primal notions and is tending towards desires primal objects, okay? So we are not aware of the lust within us. We are not aware of how our soul works. Both are in you, just as in bees there is the honey making urge. Such primal will deserves no praise. It deserves no blame. Okay? We just lust for what is beautiful. That's just how we are made. Now, that all other longings may conform to this first will, there is in you, inborn, the power that counsels, keeper of the threshold of your ascent. This is the principle of which your merit may be judged, for it garners and winnows good and evil longings, okay? So what we can do, our choice, our free will in the matter is to resist our temptation, to say no. That's what Augustine would say, right? We can just say no, no, no. Yes, I want her, but it's bad for me, so I will stop myself from doing so, okay? Those reasoners who reach the roots of things learn of this inborn freedom. The bequest that, thus, they left onto the world is ethics. Okay? Even if we allow necessity as source for every power that inflames in you, the power to curb that love is still your own. The power to curb that love is still your own. We can resist. We can say no. We can deny our love. This noble power is what Beatrice means by free will. Therefore, remember it if she should ever speak of it to you. Okay? So this is the conception of love from Vergil. Okay, does that make sense? Love can be good or it can be bad. It's you who must decide. If it's bad for you, then you must resist. Okay? And so what is Dante's response to this argument? Do you guys remember? What's the response to this? Okay. The response is this. The response is, if you truly love someone, then you only want what's best for that person. And so, if the person says to you, I will only marry you if you give me $10 million, then you know that person doesn't love you. So you turn away from her and says, all I care about is your happiness. If you're happier without me, then I will leave. But I certainly will not degrade you, like by thinking that you're only worth $10 million. To my eyes, you're priceless. And you only degrade yourself if you think that you're only worth $10 million. Does that make sense? Okay? So love is not about possession. It's about respecting the person for who she is. Okay? Does that make sense? All right? All right, so let's continue. So now they're climbing up the mountain of purgatory. And purgatory is an isolated mountain. Okay, there's like a force field around it that protects it from the natural elements. But every now and then, there's an earthquake. Okay, the entire mountain trembles. And the reason why is because a soul within that mountain has cleansed himself or herself of her sins. She's absolved herself of her sins. And therefore, he or she now has access to heaven. And the heavens celebrate this with a shake, okay? With an earthquake. So, Vergil and Dante are climbing, and they meet a man named Statius, a poet, who has just expiated himself, okay? Who's just released himself from his sins. And he's so excited because he's going to heaven. All right? And this is what he says. So had the will to climb before, but that will was opposed by longing to do penance, as once to sin instilled by divine justice. Okay? So the people in purgatory are those who have committed a sin, and they need to do penance before they go to heaven. Now, this is really important. Why? Because, ask yourself this question. If hell is a place where people go because they've sinned, and purgatory is a place where people go because they sin, what is the difference? Right? Okay, and what we will learn is this. The difference is the question of will. People in purgatory recognize that they have committed a sin and that they must do penance before they go to heaven. But they're willing to admit that they've committed a sin, and they're willing to do the penance. And the penance could be 1,000 years, it could be 1 year. It doesn't matter, okay? But they're willing to commit themselves to penance. Hell is a place where you go because you refuse to admit you've committed a sin. You refuse to admit you're wrong. If you refuse to admit you're wrong, you can never do penance. You can never absolve yourself of your sins. And that's the difference. Guys, that's the only difference, okay? In terms of like crime, in terms of sin, it's the same. But the difference is those in purgatory have committed themselves to redeeming themselves. All right. So let's continue. And this is Statius, by the way, who have lain in the suffering 500 years. He's been here 500 years, okay? And more, just now have felt my free will for a better threshold. Thus, you have heard the earthquake and the pious spirits throughout the mountain as they praise the Lord, and may he send them speedily upward. So if you are able to release yourself from your sin, there's an earthquake, and now you have access to heaven. So did he speak to us, and just as joy is greatest when we quench a greater thirst, the joy he brought cannot be told in words. Statius is the happiest person in the universe at this point because he has found paradise. And my wise guide, and this is Vergil, I now can see the net impeding you, how one slips through and why it quakes here and what makes you all rejoice. And now may it please you to tell me who you were. In your own words, may I find why you've lain here for so many centuries. Tell us who you are. Okay? Who are you? How are you able to accomplish this? In that age, when the worthy Titus, with help from the highest king, avenged the wounds from which the blood that Judas sold had flowed. Okay, so this is about 70. And Titus is the Roman general who attacked Jerusalem, sacked it, and destroyed the temple. And the Christians saw this as revenge for the killing of their Savior, Jesus. At sufficient fame beyond, that spirit replied, I bore the name that lasts the longest and honors most, but faith was not yet mine. Okay? So he's trying to explain who he is. So gentle was the spirit of my verse that Rome drew me, son of Tullus, to her, and there my brow deserved a crown of myrtle. On earth my name is still remembered, Statius. I sang of Thebes and then of great Achilles. I fell along the way of that last labor. Okay? So he's an epic poet, just like Vergil. That the sparks that warmed me, the seeds of my ardor, were from the holy fire, the same that gave more than 1,000 poets light and flame. Okay? So what inspired me is the holy fire. Who is the holy fire? We would think God, right? Nope, it is Vergil. Okay? I speak of the Aeneid. It is Vergil who is the holy fire. It is Vergil who is God. When I wrote verse, it was mother to me, it was nurse. My work without it would not weigh an ounce. I was inspired by the Aeneid and Vergil to write my poetry. Vergil is the God, the mother, who nursed me. And to have lived on earth when Vergil lived, for that I would extend by 1 more year the time I owe before my exile's end. I've been in purgatory for 500 years. But if I had a chance to meet Vergil, I would stay one more year. That's how Vergil, that's how much I love Vergil. That's how important Vergil is to me. He doesn't know that the person sitting next to him is Vergil, okay? These words made Vergil turn to me, and as he turned, his face through silence said, "Be still." Okay? He's like, "Shut up, man. I don't want to know who I am." All right? So what's going on here? Well, what's really important for us to understand is that this shows us that Vergil was lying. Vergil told us in the beginning of the Divine Comedy it was impossible for merit to leave limbo and ascend to paradise. He told us that you have to be baptized in order to get into heaven. Status was not baptized, right? Status is exactly like Vergil, a Roman epic poet. But Status is able to ascend to heaven, but Vergil is not. Does that make sense? And the reason why Status is able to go to heaven is Status wants to, okay? He's willing to admit there are flaws in his thinking. He's willing to admit that his understanding of the world is flawed and he needs to undergo introspection, reflection to improve himself. Vergil is not. Does that make sense? All right? So let's go to the very last passage, and then we'll end. And this is Canto 30. And this is when Beatrice is ascending from heaven. Okay? No, she's descending from heaven on a chariot. And it is, and she's beautiful, okay? And at this point, if you're Vergil, you might be like, wow, this is my chance to get out of limbo and go to heaven, right? Because Beatrice, who's in heaven, asked me to do her a favor. Guide Dante through Inferno and Purgatory. I've done that, man. Now she owes me. And here's my chance to say to Beatrice, hey, could you do me a favor and get me into heaven? That's all he has to do, right? That would make sense. Let's see what happens. So this is Beatrice descending from heaven. And Dante is enraptured, okay? She's completely focused on Beatrice. Within her presence, I had once been used to feeling trembling, wonder, dissolution, but that was long ago. Still, though my soul, now she was veiled, could not see her directly, by way of hidden force that she could move, I felt the mighty power of old love. All right, so it's been decades since he last saw her, but he still feels for her. He's trembling, okay? He's completely enraptured by Beatrice. As soon as that deep force had struck my vision, the power that, when I had not yet left my boyhood, had already transfixed me, I turned around and to my left, just as a little child, afraid of in distress, will hurry to his mother, anxiously, he's turning around. Who does he want to talk to? Vergil, right? There are butterflies in his stomach. He's excited. He's trembling. He said, Vergil, it's Beatrice. Okay? He sees Vergil as his father. He wants to share his joy with Vergil. All right? And where's Vergil? To say to Vergil, I am left with less than one drop of my blood that does not tremble. I recognize the signs of the old flame. Vergil, it's Beatrice. I've waited decades for this moment. He wants to share this happiness with Vergil. But Vergil had deprived us of himself. Vergil, the gentlest father. Vergil, he to whom I gave myself for my salvation. Vergil has run away. At this climax, at this moment when Dante is finally reunited with Beatrice, the moment that Vergil has completed his quest, Vergil has run away. Okay? He's run away. He's disappeared. No one knows where he is. And even our ancient mother laws was not enough to keep my cheeks, though washed with dew, from darkening again with tears. what Dante wants more than anything else is for Virgil to share his happiness. What he wants more than anything else is for Virgil to ascend to heaven, like Dante will. And Virgil's disappeared. And Dante knows at this point, Virgil will never change. Virgil's run away because he refuses to admit he is wrong. You understand? Once Virgil sees the love between Beatrice and Dante, then Virgil knows his conception of love is wrong. Because never once did Dante possess Beatrice. But never once did Dante stop loving Beatrice. So love is not about possession. It's about trust. It's about faith. That's what love is. And so rather than admit he is wrong and go to heaven, by the way, Virgil is like, screw this, I'm going back to hell because I'm happy there. I'd rather burn in hell for all of eternity than admit I'm wrong. Dante, though Virgil's leaving you, do not yet weep. Do not weep yet. You'll need your tears for what another sword must yet inflict. Beatrice says to Dante, let him go. Let him go. You can't save him. You have to save yourself. There's no point in trying to save those who don't want to be saved. There just isn't. All right? And so that this is the last we will see of Virgil. And as you can understand, at this point, in our hearts, we've also learned to let Virgil go. And this means that slowly from our minds, the Aeneid will dissipate, will dissolve itself, and we will have a new memory called the Divine Comedy come into place, which will reshape the way we see the universe. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? Is this clear? All right? Any questions about this? Yeah, go ahead.
It actually goes way back, so if you still got some lecture to go, keep on going.
No. I'm finished. Yeah.
Okay, and so I'm sorry about this because I was like trying to answer messages at the same time.
So, yeah, no worries. Yeah.
Missed some stuff, but so you said Virgil put Dido in hell.
That's right.
Yeah, I missed that part. Like how did he do that?
Okay.
And like not like as opposed to
Yeah.
Dante put it, or like
Right. Okay. So, how did Virgil put Dido in hell? Okay. So this goes back to the Aeneid, which everyone will have read. If you read the Divine Comedy, you will certainly have read the Aeneid. So what happens in the Aeneid is that Aeneas, Prince of Troy, he's going to Rome to basically found the Roman Empire. Okay, that is his divine mission sent to him by the gods. But along the way, he gets shipwrecked on Carthage, and Dido, who is the queen of Carthage, welcomes him and his people, and they fall in love. And then they get married, they have sex, and all that. But then the gods get angry because they didn't want Aeneas in Carthage. They want him in Rome. Okay, so they sent Mercury, the messenger god, to tell him, hey man, Aeneas, go to Rome. And Aeneas, because he's pious, okay, that's what he's famous for being pious. He just basically says, fine, okay? And Dido, of course, gets very upset. And he warns Aeneas, if you leave, I can only kill myself. I love you that much. And Aeneas is basically like, yeah, go kill yourself, okay? So he leaves, and she kills herself. Okay, she basically throws herself into a, I can't remember. I think she just stabs herself with a sword and then throws herself off into a fire. Okay, so Dido is dead. Now, on the way to Rome, Aeneas has to go through hell in order to get a prophecy of the founding of Rome. And in hell, who does he meet? He meets Dido. And Aeneas is kind of, it's awkward for him. And he's like, I just go say hi, okay? But the moment he tries to say hi to Dido, Dido runs away. And what's happened is that in hell, not only is she burning in hell, but she's lost the power to speak, which for the Greeks and the Romans was even worse than death. You've lost the power to speak. So that's what happens in the Aeneid. And Dante is continuing this idea in the Divine Comedy. He's assumed that if you're reading the Divine Comedy, you've already read the Aeneid, which I mean, and again, the Aeneid is what you have to memorize in school. Yeah.
And, I was just wondering though, like with her being a pagan, like I know she could get out of hell, I suppose, but she would have been there by default anyways, whether she fulfilled herself or not, right?
That's right.
Like, just according to the theology that's set up.
Yeah. So in Vergil's cosmology, Dido has to be in hell because she's a pagan, and Aeneas is there as well. So Aeneas is actually in limbo, and Dido is in the first circle of hell. The problem, though, is that Vergil does not acknowledge Dido. Okay, so it's like Vergil wants to block Dido from his own mind. He's trying to ignore the fact that Dido is his creation. He feels kind of embarrassed about all this. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have any questions?
Yeah, so there's several ideas like limbo and there's purgatory and there's heaven. So like who created those conceptions of heaven and like all those areas of how is it?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Where these ideas limbo and purgatory come from? Okay, so what's happening is that Dante is dealing with an entire cosmology of Christian thought, okay? Because throughout Christian history, there have been a lot of problems. One big problem is, let's just say that you're a baby and you are born before the time of Christ, okay? And you die because you're sick, okay? Well, that makes no sense. Well, then, according to Christian theology, then the baby would burn in hell. Doesn't make any sense, right? Because it's a baby. He or she is without sin, and he got unlucky, right? So they create this place called limbo for these special cases. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so that's where we get the idea of limbo from. And then purgatory is another idea that was created in order to basically as a middle ground between hell and heaven, okay? Because there are lots of special cases where, okay, this person did some sin and so can't have access to heaven, but the sin doesn't qualify for hell, right? So they created purgatory. So the genius of Dante is he's basically accessing all this cosmology. And like there are different conflicts within this cosmology, right? And he's creating his own cosmology. All right, so before Dante, the idea of purgatory was not that common. But after Dante, purgatory became a much more common concept in Christian theology. All right? Also, if you actually read the Divine Comedy, it's clear that Dante is drawing a lot of his ideas from Gnosticism. Okay? So in other words, what's happening is that even though the Catholic Church is trying to impose orthodoxy on the European population, most people are actually resisting, especially the educated elite. They're resisting, and they're creating their own theology in opposition to the Catholic Church. So they all believe in Jesus, but their interpretation of Jesus is different. Okay? So one major difference in the Divine Comedy is that it's orthodoxy that Jesus died for our sins. But when Beatrice and Dante talk about Jesus, Beatrice tells Dante, no, Jesus died to awaken us, to educate us to our own flaws. Because otherwise, we could not look ourselves in the mirror. Okay? The death of Jesus was so shocking that it forced us to look ourselves in the mirror and to see the sin within us. Okay? So it was an act of education. It was an act of inspiration, rather than an act of redemption. Okay?
According to Wikipedia, I was just checking this out. So the Catholic Church kind of solidified its own understanding of purgatory in 1274 at the Council of Lyon. Right, so the church gets together and like meets for 10 years or something, and figure out what its act is, right? And so in 1274 they solidified their understanding of purgatory, like this. You mentioned earlier about the Reformation, but the idea of purgatory wound up becoming a really big problem for the church, because the idea was like, if you're suffering and burning in purgatory for 500 years, you could pay some money to get out of it, right? And this will be something that like Martin Luther will be very angry about and say this is corruption and so on. So over the course of basically 200 years from the time this was instituted, it creates a literary masterpiece, but also kind of lays the seeds to
That's right.
The church falling apart. So
Yeah. The other thing that we didn't really discuss is that at this point in European history, this year about 1300, right? As Doug says, there's a lot of reflection going on. Like people within the Catholic Church hierarchy understand that Augustine, his theories, his theology are problematic, okay? And so what happens is that a new theologian named Thomas Aquinas comes and his orthodoxy starts to replace that of Augustine. And Aquinas is a much more enlightened, much more open-minded individual than Augustine is. Okay, they're basically dealing with two different social milieus. When Augustine was around, Rome was at the height of its power. The Catholic Church was an empire. But obviously, a few hundred centuries later, there was the Arabian conquest, and there was the Mongolian conquest as well. So there was a lot of more self-reflection going on. Okay, and so if you look at the ideas of Thomas Aquinas and Dante, they align very closely. But what's important for us to understand is philosophy is not as effective as poetry. Philosophy is about ideas, and you can debate these ideas. But poetry goes into your subconscious, and they become the building blocks of your psyche. Okay, does that make sense? Because poetry is language. And as we discussed, it was very common back then. It was actually a great practice for just people to memorize poetry. They didn't actually know what they were memorizing, but they just memorized it. And it made them much more fluent in language and much more fluid in thought. Okay? And that's a cultural practice that we no longer do, to our detriment, basically. Right?
So that's some Shakespeare in your head?
Okay, so are there any more questions before we?
Maybe just one. Like you did plant the intriguing idea that he's inventing the scientific revolution.
That's right.
And the seeds of the Reformation as well. You want to pick up one of those and lead us along that?
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So like where's maybe like for the Reformation, like where's that coming from with Dante?
Okay. So the key idea of the Protestant Reformation is that you have direct access to God, right? And how do you access God? Through the Bible, right? You don't need a priest to be the middleman, because if there's a middleman priest, all sorts of problems are being created. Corruption is a huge issue, but also orthodoxy. And so the idea of the Protestant Reformation is that you can access God through the Bible itself. Okay? And why you're able to do that is because God is within you and you're within God. And therefore, through self-study, you're able to access truth yourself. Okay? So that's the main idea of the Protestant Reformation. Does that make sense? Okay. And then when we talk about the Silent Revolution, the main idea of the Silent Revolution is the institutionalization of doubt. All right? What does that mean? It means we encourage you to ask questions. We encourage you to debate because that's what God wants. And where do we get this idea from? Because in heaven, Beatrice and Dante are arguing all the time. It's divine to ask questions. It's divine to doubt. It's divine to experiment. All right? Remember, the father of the scientific revolution is Galileo. Where's Galileo from? Florence, right? So Galileo grew up immersed in the Divine Comedy. All right? These things aren't accidental, okay? Right? All right, does that make sense? But I will go into these topics and themes much more specifically next semester, okay? Any more questions? Okay, great. So I will see you guys next semester then.